My name's Cory Hetherington, and I'm from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. I'm a professional engineer with an MBA, so a fairly engineering business background. Always felt a pull towards a spiritual way of life, but never connected with any sort of religion or organized religion. And so I found myself for the last 20 years fumbling around, seeking in general. And 15 years ago, I saw the movie What the Bleep Do We Know? And was introduced to these ideas, these concepts, and I was excited. I was like, it was my truth. For the first time in my life, I had heard and been presented with some information that I felt could be useful in helping me on my journey in life. I did a good job checking all the boxes in society, an acceptable, productive member of society, right? But true happiness, true sustainable happiness had always been elusive to me. So I was reintroduced to Amit Goswami a couple years ago, and reviewed the science, where it's at today, how things have progressed the last 15 years, and if there was something there I could grab onto and use today. Where had things got? 15 years ago was a nice movie, but there wasn't anything else out there that I could latch on to for my needs. And so a couple years ago, I revisited this stuff, and about 6-8 months ago was presented with the opportunity to do a master's and or PhD in quantum science and consciousness. And I went, cool. That's for me. Not because it's a master's or a PhD, because I can read the information, I can absorb it, I can figure it out, I can do some things with it, but to be surrounded by like-minded people and learn off each other and feed off each other. This isn't like Newtonian physics. It's not like Newtonian science where, force equals mass times acceleration. The math is well understood. Everything is so well understood with matter. So well understood, sort of. Once it's matter, it's well understood. And what we're talking about doing here is not well understood. And it does, in my mind, require a collective to explore together, to define. It's almost like trying to define Newtonian physics way back when, 400 years ago. So there's a couple things that I think are important to mention. The one thing that we learned is that consciousness is the ground of all being. And it means a variety of things, but I think the most important thing for me to highlight here is that it means that matter is not the ground of all being. So I grew up, and I think a lot of us do, thinking that, as we deconstruct molecules into atoms, into electrons and protons and neutrons, that we're getting a better understanding of the world and around us, and we can better model things and we do things with it. But what we found is that you cannot deconstruct that far enough. And so quantum physics started pointing to this stuff 100 years ago. Indian spirituality started pointing to this stuff 5,000 years ago. So it's kind of cool for me, being, the recovering material scientist that I am, to acknowledge, the Indian spiritual roots of this science. The other thing that I think is important is I wouldn't classify this subject or topic as, I mean, maybe some people would call it metaphysics. I don't call it New Age science. I don't call it feel-good stuff. There is way more going on here than trying to create a positive messaging or a feel-good thing to mask the depth of our suffering. And that's the thing, like, you know, I was exposed to The Secret. I've been exposed to the intention experience. I've been exposed to a lot of other things, but they are limited in their scope. Again, it seems like it's all about, you know, being more successful in a material world. And again, that's just a way of masking the deep-rooted suffering, is the best term I can use for this stuff. And so what we learn about is intention, but intention for the greater good, you know, consistent with the purposive evolution of consciousness. That is what we're striving for here. The science of quantum physics combined with Indian spirituality gives us some tools to, we call it transform. We call it transform our lives, to transform the outside world, so it's some tools to transform. And, you know, one of the things that was really important to me is in the spiritual traditions, there's a lot of talk about enlightenment, meditation, and you know, I get to this place of oneness or nothingness, or this elusive thing out there that doesn't make sense to me, and truly doesn't actually seem to be that achievable to ordinary people. It seems like it's, you know, reserved for a select few that might be able to meditate 40,000 hours and get there, and then what they do is they go and live in the mountains and isolate. Like, they don't engage in this world. And what this program has laid out for us is a way that an ordinary person can participate in the journey of enlightenment. And it's a journey. It's not a destination. And so we talk about these things called archetypes. And as we explore those archetypes, we get to, ultimately, we get to something called traditional enlightenment. But before that, we would call something called quantum enlightenment before we get to traditional enlightenment. And then there's 9 archetypes that we explore. They are the Plato type noble feelings. It's something we are all in touch with. You know, it's something we grow up thinking about as children in kindergarten, and then we lose track of as we get older.
Just with this, can you give me a very practical example of what it has been touching in you, in yourself, so we can relate? What is it going to be? What is it going to be different in your daily life, knowing what you are talking to us about? You know, where is it going to be active?
Right, that's a great question. Like, how do we apply this information in my daily life, and what does it mean to me? So specifically, the archetype of wholeness is my archetype. And what that means to me is that there's an integration of dichotomies in our world. So male and female, inner creativity, outer creativity. So a good, I guess I'm not crystal clear on a good example, because this archetype is what I'm exploring in this incarnation. And so I don't have a good handle on it. I don't. But when I'm looking back over my life, I can see how I started out with a very argumentative attitude. So if you said white, I said black. You know, you say black, I say white, right? Like, just whatever it was. And so I created these conflicts, and I created these dichotomies. I mean, for me, it was like second nature to create a dichotomy. And So I'm seeing now that my happiness or my dharma, so being able to identify my archetype helps me identify my life path. So now I intend to be happy. I intend for the greater good. And in doing so, I get connected with my archetype, which is consistent with my dharma, which is now a more fulfilling existence for me on a day-to-day basis. So now what that means to me is when I'm engaging with people on a regular basis, I'm looking to transcend the left and right argument and find a more creative solution to, it's black, it's white, well, maybe there's a version of gray that makes better sense now.